Good day, nerds, and welcome to episode 102 of the Nerd Cantina Show. And today we've got a Cantina conversation, again with our book reviewer, McCarthy-Biank. And today she's sitting down with the co-authors of the Devastation Class, Elaine Mongeon and Glen Zipper. In this interview, Megan goes in depth in their transition and decisions towards writing this novel in the first place. Both Elaine and Glen come from a film background, and the path towards getting this book published was a very interesting one. And then they talk about the development of this story, as well as how they came up with this with a long journey in mind towards future sequels. It's a great interview, and we hope you enjoy.
We are here with Glen Zipper and Elaine Mongeon. Elaine, I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Yes, you got it right. Thank you.
Awesome. Authors of Devastation Class. First of all, thank you once again for making time for us. And, you know, I read the book. I love the book. And I'm really excited to have you guys here so that we can, add an extra layer of what you're sharing with the world and with our audience, and for people who tune in. So thank you so much for squeezing us in and talking to us about it.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Okay. So you both have pretty impressive resumes or IMDb sheets, so to speak. So Glen, your background is more heavily in like documentaries and production. And Elaine, you both write, but Elaine writes and directs mostly, correct? And then you have like a lot of film crew experience throughout the years too. So, and then you both have worked together on a couple projects as well, correct?
Yes.
So, yeah, because I think I did watch Good Morning and Swiped to Death, which were both they're pretty good. I didn't know what to expect with the very short 8 to 12 minute film, but no, it was really entertaining, and it definitely had that little shock factor at the end of both of those. So I really appreciated those. It was really cool. So what kind of pushed you to take on literature, take on entertainment in literature form versus what you're used to in terms of a lot of your experience and your projects in the past have been for film and or other types of screens, either short film or longer series. And so what kind of made you decide to take on literature and write a novel series?
Want to take that one, Elaine?
Sure. So Devastation Class actually started as a TV concept that Glen and I dreamt up. And we had written a few scripts, and we wanted to have a fanboy, non-industry fanboy read. So we sent it to my friend. We sent it to a few people, but one of them was my friend Tom in New York, who was designing book jackets at the time for a publisher. And he read it, and he was like, I love this. This is awesome. If you can't get it going as a series, maybe you should consider writing it as a YA novel series because, I'm having to read a lot of YA right now because I'm designing these jackets, and it would really fit right in. And so about 6 months later, we had given it to some people in the industry, and we got positive feedback, but because we were nobodies, no one really wanted to support us or support the project. So Tom said, where are you with it? And we said, we're basically nowhere. And he said, hey, can I give it to a couple of my editors? And so he gave it to his editors, and they really, really liked the material and set a call with us. And they said, this is great. We love the world. We love the characters, but we don't know if you can write prose. And so we need proof that you can write prose. So we advise that you write a book proposal.
Right.
Okay.
Just interject and say, we definitely, Elaine's telling this sort of somewhat sanitized version of it because the real version is really, can you write a book? And we said, absolutely, we can write a book, no problem, in our sleep. Next week, and we hung up the phone and we sort of looked at each other and we're like, all right, can we Google how to write a book?
Or fake it till you make it. We got this.
Totally. Basically. Yeah.
So then you did present it to them kind of in a screen written concept form.
Originally it was, I think it was 3 episodes.
Okay.
And we had a Bible as well for the first season of the show.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I definitely it's definitely suspense and action driven, and I think you definitely kind of get hints of that as where it was kind of you could kind of tell almost in a sense that it was, because some books are like very character driven or backstory driven, and you do kind of like sprinkle some backstory here and there, and so like me as the reader, I was kind of like, you left little tidbits where I was like, okay, this explains that, this explains that, and you kind of tease us with it. Because you are planning a series. And so, no, that's really interesting that, you did start it off as like a screen concept. And then you kind of had to go back and say, okay, now we could do this. Okay, how do we do this? We got to like kind of switch a game plan here. And so your colleague, he suggested young adult, because I was kind of wondering like why you chose young adult versus like another age group.
It was always young adults. The original concept was always going to be centered around these young men and women who were put in an impossible situation and then had to make an impossible choice. And really the evolution from it being a television concept where, we had a pilot and a few episodes to, a book, it actually allowed us to expand the universe. Because if you're making a TV show, let's use The Walking Dead as an example. So you have the sort of the long arc of a season where they have to. There's different settings every season, but you want to see like, are they going to be able to get out of this larger predicament that happens over the course of 11 episodes?
Yeah.
Also, you need self-contained stories each episode, sort of the B stories, the character-driven stories, and when we transitioned from a television concept to a book, we were essentially relieved of the obligation of having to have these little vignette, anecdotal stories, where, it's an even better example would be Star Trek, where, either would be the larger adventure stories, but then you'd be like, oh, this is a Picard episode.
No, okay, yeah.
Like, oh, this is a Data episode. So we didn't have to worry about being democratic and being like, all right, so this episode's going to be about this character, this episode's going to be about this character. We were able to concentrate on the larger world, the larger universe, and have all these characters work together as an ensemble.
Yeah. So was that like, because I'm just kind of curious as to like, I guess what I imagine that was just a challenge within itself, because your experience, your professional career has been so heavily involved in writing and producing for screen. And so, what was like for this process, like coming from your background, what was it like? Maybe 2-part question of like, what was your favorite part about the whole process? Like maybe biggest lessons learned. And then what were like the biggest challenges of this process? Kind of like, having to switch gears.
Mm-hmm. Elaine, do you want to start?
The favorite.
Well, I would say, I think we agree that the best part of what is something that is a fact about filmmaking is never just a director's vision that's being executed on. It requires, as cliche as it sounds, it takes a village. You have your writer, you have your director, you have your producers, you have your cinematographer, you have your editors, you have your production coordinators and production managers and grips and gaffers and first ADs and special effects people and set dressers and set designers. And all of these people have to come together and work as a team and find a chemistry in order to make a great film.
Yeah.
And also part of that process requires a lot of compromise because you have all these talented people coming together and they have, they're all driving towards attaining one specific vision, but they sort of do bring their own vision for that project to the table each time.
Sure.
Those are going to butt up against one another every once in a while. So these compromises are going to be made. So when you look at a finished film, the great ones, the not so great ones, the bad ones, they are all in some respect. We used to say like a horse by committee is a camel. And so all of them are a bit of a camel, but some of them are great camels. When you go into writing a book, it's really just you writing it. Of course, you eventually have to show it to an editor, and the editor will go, this is great, this is great, this is actually
right.
Very not great, please change it. But until you get to that point, you're really on an island, by yourselves, and there's an incredible amount of freedom there. But it's also, one of the negative things too, because you don't get that feedback. You don't have that constant sort of push and pull with other people. And so you can sort of go all the way out into left field and end up completely lost. And so you're always worried that, when we do show this to somebody, how are they going to react? And because it's such a personal thing that you've done, it's poured out of your soul without the contribution of other people, if they react negatively, it's pretty gut-wrenching.
Oh, man. No, that totally makes sense. Because then it's like, the collaboration is there, but it's kind of like a step-by-step. There's certain phases that you go through with the novel versus, when you're working on a film project where all that collaboration is just kind of like ongoing, like you get feedback like almost immediately. Whereas during a novel, it's like it's almost like you get the first draft and then you get feedback, and that's when they either chop it up or maybe or maybe they're like, oh, this is amazing, or maybe nitpick at it only a little bit. And so I imagine that was like a major like switch for you, because you didn't get any of that feedback that you're used to during that first initial drafting phase.
And you're right,
except amongst each other. Quite frankly.
Right. Yeah, sure.
We're constantly bouncing things off of each other and being sounding boards for one another during the process. But that's just us in our like little cocoon.
Pre-quarantine bubble, different type of bubble.
Oh, no, right. No, but I think that's good. At least you had experience working with one another on similar projects, so that at least, you kind of charted this unfamiliar territory together. Mm-hmm. So I imagine that might have, help take the edge off a little bit in terms of any, reservations you might have had of having to going into a new project and a whole different approach to it.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
So what did you like the most about writing for literature versus writing for screen?
Well, for me, even in documentaries, you are always beholden to your budget. We've all want to do.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, that would be great, but have to mortgage the house, donate my blood, go to Vegas, hit it big. And so you really are constrained by the limits of your wallet. Whereas when you're making a book, you're writing a book, you really, the only ceiling is the limit of your imagination. And so that was, I think, the most exciting thing for both of us when we were writing the book, in that there was literally nowhere we couldn't take the story. And as producers, every once in a while, because we knew that we wanted this to be adapted into a film or a TV series one day.
Sure.
But so we'd write certain things. We go, oh, this is really going to piss off that producer or that one day. Sort of like, oh, he's going to have to blow up this planet. Okay, well,
right.
Don't worry about that when she's producing the film. But I do think that having the no creative constraints in terms of how we tell the story was probably the best thing about working in this medium.
Yeah, I agree.
So then kind of piggybacking off of that, was there a lot of what kind of conflict, if any, in terms of fleshing out the story? Maybe try to be a little as spoiler free as possible, or maybe minor spoilers, but were there any scenes that you guys kind of fought over, or was there something that, one of you was really attached to and the other person kind of had to make the case of well, this doesn't really make sense, plot wise or whatever, or no, this character wouldn't do that, or any other things where you guys kind of had to how you said, compromise amongst yourselves, or maybe you were attached to something that you just didn't want to let go, and how that kind of came resolved.
Yeah, well, the first two that come to mind was the first sort of major conflict that Elaine and I had in the book was if we were going to write it in first person or third person. And we started writing the book in third person, and I was pretty insistent upon that. And
the reason was because you can have this sort of omniscient voice telling the story. You don't have to be in one character's head.
Yes, because we knew that this was the type of story where different things are going to be happening simultaneously in different places of the ship and different places of the universe. And if you're in the head of one character, how do we tell that kind of story?
Right.
And I think my first instinct was, well, let's not stay in the head of any one character. Let's go with the proverbial voice of God. And something about it that wasn't quite working. And Elaine kept pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing until I wanted to jump off. No, I'm just kidding. But she was very insistent that we should try to take a look at transitioning to having it be a first-person multi-character perspective. And eventually I got so she worn down by her constant bringing that up that I was like, you know what, why don't you just go away and rewrite 3 chapters in the first person, and they're going to be terrible. And then I will read it and I will tell you what I already know, that it's awful. And then fine. And then she goes away and she comes back and, I don't know, it could have been a month later. And she sends me a few chapters in the first person. And I started reading it angry because I was like, I told you this was going to be bad. It's not bad. It's much, much better. So it fell between my legs. I had to say to Elaine, you're right. And then we embarked on writing the rest of the book in the multi-character first-person perspective. Then the other big one, which I think is a bit of a tiny little spoiler, is there was a whole other perspective in this book that we took out.
Okay.
And I think we actually, we think it's a better book for it. But that character was so much fun to write that it was hard for us to take out the perspective, and that's Basa. And he's sort of the character that's not aligned with any one side in this book. So to have the freedom to tell sort of his perspective, which is critical of what everybody's doing, because he's removed from everything that he's seeing, and he's a funny character. So it gave the ability to, have a few more jokes, to be a bit lighter at times. The spoiler is he 100%, his perspective is 100% going to be in book 2.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And book 2 will have the perspective of other characters. It won't just be the characters that you've met and whose perspective we told the story through in book 1.
Would you say the same, Elaine, is that, the bigger conflicts was deciding between the first and the third person and having to prove it to him, literally on paper?
Yeah, I mean, that one. And then we had another one where we were kind of struggling with making specifically Viv's and JD's voices unique.
Mm-hmm.
And in trying to figure out how we would do that, one of the ideas thrown out was to make her from Texas with a drawl and very specific way of talking. And I was very much against that because in my mind, she was not that at all.
Sure.
And so we kind of went back and forth on that and ultimately gave her a different way of speaking and an inner dialogue where she literally talks to herself to differentiate her. And also word choice, certain words she uses, are not words that JD would use and vice versa, just to give them some differentiation.
Yeah, because that kind of made me wonder, actually, one of the questions I wanted to ask was, how did you choose the characters to feature? Which points of view? How did you choose the characters that would be featured as the speakers?
Well, JD and Viv were always, JD and Viv were always our main characters from the very beginning of, from the inception of the concept, even when it was a TV show. So that was definitely an obvious. And then Liko, we felt it was really important to add a character that was a student, so that we had the student's perspective as well. And Liko also having his background and his history brought forward so that perspective, it's a key perspective in the overall story of the Alliance and the Castazzi. So that was that. And then Nicholas, you can speak to Nicholas. Glenn.
Right. Well, Nicholas, the entire sort of mystery of Devastation Class and the Devastation Class trilogy sort of lives inside of Nicholas.
Okay.
Both literally and figuratively. And so we absolutely had to let the audience into not only his perspective and his mind, but what is essentially his own existential crisis, which is at the heart of the themes of the book. What is free will? Where did we come from? And how frightening and how challenging it is for all of us to have questions about our own identity. And so that's the foundational reason why his perspective was always going to be critical to the book.
Yeah. And then it was, with him, it kind of almost reminded me of, maybe this is also minor spoiler, maybe major spoiler. Maybe I don't want to talk too much. I'll ask them to edit it out if we just see if it's too much. But it did remind me of a little Westworld action where, they're they explore those same themes. And, you see certain players and certain characters and they're not quite, it's something about them that's revealed later. And I remember, I don't know, maybe I'm the type of reader that doesn't always catch on too quickly, and maybe that's a good thing. But I had an interview recently with a person who Daniel Kraus. He just recently released The Living Dead with George Romero, and always really interesting conversations with him. And he was kind of talking about how with a book that he released with Bent Heavens, there's a reveal. There's several reveals, but one of them, it's kind of halfway through the book, and he's no, I would say about a third of the readers get it, which is, and it's okay. He's okay with that because it means it wasn't too obvious, but it was just there enough where people could still figure it out. And then once you kind of take it from there, and then you kind of linger on that and reflect on that, because that's what I felt with a couple characters. Once in Devastation Class, when certain things were revealed, it kind of made me reflect and be wait a second. And then you kind of have this whole new perspective of certain, actions, certain points of view, certain thoughts, certain
choices.
Little tidbits, little events that take place, and you're oh, after the fact, and you don't really think about it at first, or maybe you do, and you're kind of onto that person. And then it's revealed and you're oh shit, okay, wait a second, this changes the whole playing field now. So I think that was one of my favorite parts. I think maybe just myself as a reader in general, where I don't always maybe I try to make myself feel better. That's a good thing that maybe I didn't catch on too quickly, but especially with how other details were revealed and later on in the book, which obviously I won't go over because that one was just too good to realize it was another oh shit moment.
Well, we hope to have. Yeah, I'm glad that it had that effect on you. I think sure that Elaine's really excited about that as well. I will say that there's actually quite a bit of stuff like that in the book, but they're all across the spectrum from 1 to 10, 1 being the stuff that you are going to see coming, that you totally got it. And then stuff you're talking about now, which is a 5 or a 6 on that scale of some people will get it, some people won't get it.
Yeah.
There's also stuff in the book that's a 10. We know you didn't get it.
Yeah.
Because the point is, we don't want you to get it in book 1. But then when you read book 2, we want you to go, holy shit, that was happening the whole time in book 1.
Yeah. Or you kind of led the leader in where now it's I'm on to you. I'm on to it. I'm going to keep an eye out. I'm going to keep a closer eye out now.
Yeah, exactly.
For book 2.
There's many Easter eggs planted in the book. And we think that, multiple reads from some people, I think that people will discover more and more things as they, read it multiple times. Yeah, no, I that would be one of the books. That kind of brings me to another question, actually, because you go through it a lot of terminology. It's very, military chain of command structure, just because of the setting, they're part of a mission or space exploration. And there's, this grueling process of becoming a cadet. And then with the students, it's all very rules based and kind of that hierarchy and that, just that type of environment. So what kind of research went into kind of taking this route of, almost like a military base in space, so to speak. Well, yeah. I think, my background, before I was a writer and producer, I was a criminal prosecutor, right? So, I work in very hierarchical structure. There's assistant prosecutors, and then there's the actual prosecutor, and there's a pecking order within the prosecutor and the assistant prosecutors, and people who report to people, and sort of that structure of how you need to behave relative to the person who's superior to you, what those dynamics are, and what it means when you break that rule structure or when you step over a boundary that you're not supposed to in a hierarchy. That's sort of the mushier stuff that I had a lot of experience with, and there's a lot of emotion and stakes that are imbued within that I was able to, along with Elaine, pay forward into the book. The actual military structure, when we're trying to be literal about it, I think we both came to the table with just some anecdotal understanding of, hierarchical structure within the military, but we did run it by some people in the military, and we just said, did we get this right?
Yeah.
And I think with two exceptions, everything was endorsed, and anywhere that they said, well, you didn't get this exactly right, then we went back and then we adjusted. Is that right, Elaine?
Yeah. And we, I think before that, we did our online research first, and then, wanted to get some confirmation that it would work that way. So.
Yeah. And I guess because of your experience, I'm sure a handful of people in your network where you've kind of had to do this type of thing before for creating and writing and producing film, where you have to do research on all these different topics and environments. And even if you were saying, Glenn, in your background and as assistant prosecutor, you said, yeah. And then when you kind of, that could still those kind of politics could still transfer into any industry with, the pecking order of, being on set and, who's in charge of what and who has to listen to who. And, there's things that are expected of you and of others. And so, and even that, when you're working on different projects, you have to do the research to really do right by your story. Mm-hmm. And so, I was really interested because, I read a lot of books, and when I read all these details that go into these certain environments, setting the scene, setting the background stories and all that. I'm just thinking that's kind of the other things that I think about is where, oh my God, what were the resources? How much research went into this? And so I thought, something kind of taking it a step further, off world and, taking into that kind of Star Trek vibe, but also still saying no, we're, there's still Earth. There's still, a team. They're still following that pecking order. And then that's kind of all they know. And then when they kind of progress through the story and they realize some of the choices they make, the decisions save them, but only because of other, they realize what they did. And it's it worked because of the specific thing that they did. And then when they realize the implications of that, the consequences, and it's too late to go back, and it has, you see the implications on the other characters too, or there's just still so much conflict within the ship and within the teams. And it almost doesn't seem to matter anymore because the world just got that much bigger somehow. I didn't know how it could get bigger with these, their fight, their space exploration, but it was a lot of it was put into perspective where, and then you see how some of the characters realize that sooner than others. Mm-hmm. And it's just yeah, where, you could kind of see dude, drop this pettiness, look around, do you not understand? This is bigger than us. This doesn't matter anymore. And then
exactly.
Yeah. And, no, that was great. And I thought it was so crazy how there's the student size is 10 times bigger than the cadets, but maybe that's how it happens a lot where it's the us versus them mentality. And unfortunately, the people who are higher ranked are vastly outnumbered. Mm-hmm. And when this huge catastrophe happens and it's our, whatever, conflict was brewing, it just explodes. It's go time. And that's what I appreciate about having Liko too, is as a point of view, because you were touching about it before where you see, you kind of have to introduce the other sides, and there would be Kasazi's sympathizers, and you have the offspring of one where it's of course he, unfortunately, because that's a running theme I noticed also. I know I'm gonna go all over the place. That's a running theme also in this book, is where these are the children who are either trying to live up to their parents' legacy or trying to get away from it or trying to make their own. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was really interesting how you presented the characters who, on one side, their parents are legends and they're veterans, and they know, everybody knows who they are because of their parents. And then also people like Liko, who who his parents are for not so good reason, not so legendary. It's legendary kind of an infamous way. And so no, I think that was a really interesting way to take it. And then having to force them to kind of reconcile and look past it and look at the bigger picture, I think definitely helped not only drive the story, but then it's by the time you get there, it's something else, some other ambush is happening, and it's okay, oh my God, all right, we don't have time for this. Like, what?
I have to tell you.
And it's a lot, it's for the characters. I kind of felt like lost with them, and it's a lot for them to handle too. Having to grapple with what they did in addition to where do we go from here? Like, we have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you something that you're probably not realizing as you're saying this. I'm sure Elaine is having the same reaction I am, which is like, wow, she really got it.
Yeah.
No, I'm a big bookworm, so I think I just like, after a while, I just, I kind of like reflect on. I enjoy character-driven stories, but the plot and the action helps drive it along too. Because sometimes, you pay attention, you get so heavily involved in these characters, but then it's really cool to like, I don't know, maybe it's just like that part of analyzing literature too, where you kind of just consider all points of view and then you consider these actions. And then I just think it's fascinating when you have to create characters that are, maybe are the opposite personality of you. And then you kind of have to dive deeper and think, how would they, what makes sense for this character's actions right now? Like, how would they respond to this particular situation?
Yeah,
and
I think you got all of that. And
yeah, 100%.
Another sort of theme of the book is either we, as human beings, we have these patterns that the world sort of ingrains in us, and we do things because that's how we've been told to do them. That's how we've been trained to do them. And these characters have their hierarchical structure, and then something happens that sends their world into sort of essentially oblivion. And from that point forward, like, does the hierarchical structure even matter anymore?
Right.
Like, why would they keep doing it the way they've always done it? But they do, or they try to. And the question is doing what they've always done and following their training and following the patterns that are ingrained in them, did that save them? Or
right.
Holding on to those patterns and doing things the way they've always done that, is that actually going to destroy them? And those are essential questions that we have, I think, ourselves every day. And you definitely seems like you came across that as you were reading the book.
Yeah. And I think, even just thinking as, you are even as the reader, you're kind of looking at, you're like, you either agree or disagree with certain actions, but, at the end of the day, like, you don't know, like you'd like to think that you would be a smart and logical person, but it's like, have you ever been in a situation where, you're being attacked and you're responsible for 80 something lives on board, and you don't know what you would do, but you bring up a good point. It's like, what was their training and their experience and their intelligence and their, their patterns that they had been ingrained. Yeah. Like, at the time it made sense to them, but then it's like, well, they have to explain their actions because there's a whole bunch of people who don't trust them at all, who have no reason to, and who don't, who also don't need to see any reason to follow the pecking order anymore.
And I think another important thing is that one of the earliest notes we got in the book from our editors was she was calling into question the choices of some of the characters. Like, why would they do that? Like, just and I go, okay, imagine you were 18 years old and you had a decision about that would either save the world or the universe or not save the universe. And that decision also involves whether some of your friends are going to die.
Yeah.
I mean, are you going to sometimes make a really stupid decision? Are you sometimes going to make the short-sighted decision because you have an extraordinary amount of pressure on you?
Yeah.
That life or death scenario, you might make the wrong decision 80% of the time.
Right.
It's fair to ask the question, like, why would they choose this? It's a stupid, or it's not the smartest way to go about this. Like, if you stopped and took a deep breath, there's 9 other safer ways to go about this. But if you're 18 and you're to die, very good chance you're going to make the wrong, perhaps even stupid decision in that scenario. And once we were able to explain that to editors who might have been a bit older and not really been into anymore, her former 18-year-old decision-making process, she was like, oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, no, I that's exactly right. I think, I think that's probably why this will kind of resonate with young adult audiences too, is that age range. It's like that decision-making, it's depends on the scenario, of course, but at the end of the day, I think a lot of readers said it's been a long time since we've been in that age group too. So it definitely depends on like either the generation or, the age. And if you can kind of like, cause it's easy to be detached once you know better, but then it's, there's another argument to be made that these young adults, these 18, 17-year-olds have more life experience because of their training. And so, it could go either way on that. And so I think we're approaching our mark. I just want to ask a couple more questions because I do want to be respectful of your time. It went by kind of quickly.
It did.
So I love the cover. It's so cool. It makes you wonder, like, what's going on? So how much say or input, did you have in generating the cover of the book?
Total. We did the cover ourselves with an artist. We didn't actually do the graphic design.
Sure.
Worked with Michelle Holm, who also does the cover art for all of Bruce Springsteen's stuff.
Oh.
She's actually won a Grammy for her work on album covers.
Oh, interesting.
And there's a friend of mine named Tom Zimney, a very successful, extraordinarily talented documentary director who actually has made a lot of films for Bruce and with Bruce. And he was the one who introduced me to Michelle. And Michelle, when we talked to her and we explained what our vision was and sort of the things that we wanted to make sure were on the cover, not only to represent the story itself, but the possibilities going forward in the trilogy, she just got it. And we worked together on it. And then her first pass at it was very close to what ended up in the actual cover.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she had sent us some comps of different ideas, and there was something else I was going to say. Sorry.
We're going to say how cool I am and what.
Oh yeah, totally. Right. Totally. Oh no, I was going to say, we're actually really lucky that we were able to hire our own artist, because I have talked to some other people in the book world, and they're like, right. Wow, like you guys got to spearhead that. That's right. Like that really happened very often. So, we were really passionate about finding the right person and the right art for this.
Yeah, no, that's because I often ask that of authors when there's a particular cover that, because I know it's different for everybody. Sometimes it's just consulting. Sometimes they have no say whatsoever. And, sometimes even then they get lucky where the illustrator kind of like hits it on point. And then other times it's like, they could say, no, I hate it. And then there's like, kind of like, well, too bad. This is what's going out, and it also depends on, I think on who, like bookshelf featured, like what else is being released around that same time. How is this cover going to stand out versus what is also being released either that week or that month. And so, yeah, no, I just thought that was really interesting because it does kind of capture like, the mood. It kind of foreshadows the mood. It kind of foreshadows like, what they're kind of dealing with eventually. And you can see it in their posture. Like they have to make tough decisions and it's like, now what? Like, this is, I loved it. And so one last question, obviously trying to be a little spoiler free. What can we look forward to in the sequels?
Well, I think that I could say a couple things. One, we already said, which is you're going to get inside the heads of a lot more characters in books 2 and book 3. So if you went through book 1 and there were characters that you were attached to and you said, well, I would have really liked to have been in their heads as well. Well, good news, you probably will be at some point.
Okay.
And I think the other thing that we can say is the events, that drive forward the narrative in book 1 and sort of everything that brought our characters, the Alliance and the Castasi together. It's been going on for much longer than you would ever know. This story begins long before the Castasi ever showed up.
Okay.
The first time on Earth, and so you will get a sense of that, and you will get to spend time there across the trilogy. And I would say, we were talking the other day, and we're not prepared to say what it is yet, but we were flirting of sometime, within the few months of the book being released on September 8th, releasing the first 2 lines of book 2, just 2 lines.
Okay.
Those 2 lines, you would read them and be like, holy shit.
Yeah. Was that the tease that you kind of got, I think, at the epilogue? Was it?
So much deeper than that.
Okay.
Like you would be like, wow, we did not see this coming.
Oh man, I hate it, but I love it. No, I can't. I seriously, this book was so cool. And I'm really excited to push this out. And, also, thank you once again for your time. I thought it was so cool to like dive into the, some of the choices you had to make. And I thought it was so interesting that you guys, with your experience in the film and TV industry where you kind of had to switch gears. But, I'm grateful that you did. And I hope that you guys really enjoyed this process. And, I'm sure you've got a lot of other ideas for your future in your career, but I hope you don't, I hope this process didn't scare you away in case you have any other ideas.
No,
we're writing away on book 2 already.
Nice. Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm excited. I hate that I have to wait a long time for it, but it's such the world of publishing,
It's true. That's very true.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you once again, Elaine Mongeon and Glen Zipper, for taking the time to talk with us today. And, congratulations on your release. And we're looking forward to seeing how it goes.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. We really appreciate it.
And I just want to take a moment to thank you for listening to episode 102 of the Nerd Cantina Show. We hope that you enjoyed this interview. And if you stumbled across us for the first time, please rejoin us for our weekly nerd news segments. And join us over at thenerdcantina.com/community, where you can join our private group and discuss the latest books you're reading or whatever other nerd topics you might enjoy. Thanks again. And we'll talk to you next week, nerds.